have to say that the doctoral consortium is my favorite part of any conference. I was a long time on the EFA, European Meetings Doctoral Consortium, when I was president of the MFA, the very challenging year of 2020. And before that, I was program chair, as the way these things work. We started a doctoral consortium, which was my pet project, and it's still running, and I recommend you all apply to that as well. And I ran the doctoral program at Rutgers for a long time. So it's really the future of the profession, as Ivo says, and I am very happy to be here today. So let me very briefly talk about a very long career that Ivo alluded to at the beginning. I started actually in IO, and I've been working on corporate finance and also the media and entertainment industries for 2 decades. I did theory, empirics, capital structure. Talk about scatter. I think the people around this table probably don't know, but my most cited paper is in the Journal of Marketing. So, I've released papers in several disciplines as well. And so I've been working on a lot of things. The most recent published paper is a paper coming out in JFQA on ambiguity and innovation, and I'm happy to talk to you later about that. I didn't want to talk about it today in this presentation. And one thing that I would put here as a piece of advice, I've been listening to other people's presentations, and I see that I have current projects that have things in common with Janet and Sean, although I didn't know about it. And they include culture and corporate governance, bias, a paper on bias. I'm happy to talk about it. Very upset about the way this paper is working out. Politics and finance, labor and governance, and technological change. So I've taught in quite a few places. I met Eva at UCLA, indeed. Longest deployment was at Rutgers. Recent now, I'm at Yeshiva University, but I was also at UCLA, NYU, University of Chicago, Cornell, Wharton, and Yale. I should add that I was basically also a visiting scholar in other places. The most recent was a nice visit before the pandemic at Kellogg, actually. Talking about PhD courses, I really enjoy teaching a joint PhD course at Yale with Ivo. We have very good students. I think so, right? You have to say yes. Yeah. Okay, so in a few minutes I want to talk a little bit about 2 things. So first, since I knew what people are working on, so I want to talk about why I think it's interesting to work on the media industries, media and entertainment industries, and then go on to some advice related and unrelated to that. And being late in the program, I will not repeat what other people have said. People have given fantastic advice here, starting from Effie. So why the creative industries are really interesting and could be a wonderful laboratory to assess, to work in. That's because in the creative industries, particularly movie, theater, and so on, it's easy to assign projects to people. And we have extensive data on projects and precise project information. So if you think of the typical theory paper in corporate finance, it starts, an entrepreneur has a project. And then it goes on and talks about all kinds of things. Now, most of the testing is done at the firm level. If you work on these kinds of things, you have project level data, which is really unavailable otherwise. And you also can attach it to people. And I'll give you one example. I'm going to talk just about several working papers, and we're going to talk about one published paper recently and one working paper, so you'll see how it can work. And I think it's really very useful to test a lot of our theories. So the only other industry that I think is comparable to some extent, but not completely so, is biotechnology, where you also have a lot of project data. And in fact, there's two papers in the RFS 2008, and one, the same issue. So one of them is our paper, one by David Robinson, and they do different aspects of alliances. If you think about alliances, why do firms do joint ventures and alliances? How would you know? So in these two industries, you have enough data about the projects so you can assess why there are these alliances between the firms, and both find more or less the same thing. In particular, the risk aspect is very important, and this is kind of a nice paper, and I'm glad we got it in, and I'm glad we got it with David's paper, so they're very comparable. So I'm going to talk about two experiments. One is a published paper in Management Science 2020, and one is a working paper, actually with Effie's colleague, Filippo Misanotti. So you see the photos of my two co-authors in these papers. There's actually a third one on the paper with Filippo, started as an RA, now as a PhD student. And so the first one is a precise assessment of human capital, and I'll be a little bit more specific in a minute. And the second is technology adoption with career concerns. So let me talk about them in a little bit of detail. So the first question is, and I think Janet's research and other people, what is the value of human capital? So there's all this CEO research. What is the value of CEO? A lot of very interesting papers that are being done. But you see, the ideal experiment, if you want to see how valuable is a CEO, is you have a CEO and you tell them, all right, you run the company. Let's say you do a merger. You do a merger. Let's see how it turns out. Then you say, all right, let's rewind time. Take CEO number 2 and let's see how you do this. And then we can compare them, and now we know exactly what is the value of a CEO to a company. But obviously, this cannot be done. Now, in the theater, you can do it. So think about play, let's say How to Succeed in Business. So you do the play, you run the play, and then at one point in time, you replace an actor in the same place. Now, keep in mind what's going on. Everything is controlled. Everything stays the same. It's the same play, same lines even, same director, same theater, physical theater. So you might think, okay, well, it's different theater, it looks different. Same everything. The only thing that changes one actor, and of course it has to be a leading role. Waiter number 3 changes, nobody cares, but a lead role. So that's what we did. So the experiment was basically to look at replacement of actors in theater and see if there's any change in revenues as a result of that. And we did find that this is one table, it doesn't matter, but if you look at the bottom line there, so there's non-star to star, and that was the only thing that was significant. So, I mean, I can talk more about it if you want, but in principle, it does matter. So we can see that even in a super controlled environment, human capital matters. And our conclusion, I guess that's why they published it in Management Science, was that if that happens, if in a super controlled environment, human capital makes a difference, then certainly it should make a difference when the environment is not controlled and a lot of things are basically going on. So I think that was kind of a nice experiment. I'm glad we were able to do it. By the way, it's a lot more complicated than we thought about, getting data, running it, and so on, everything. So here's a little bit of advice. I had been thinking about this paper for a long time, and I thought, yeah, once we get the data, it's so easy. 3 years later, we did have it, but everything is more complicated and time-consuming than you think. And one last thing on this. So, we ran it and everything worked out, the paper got accepted. Now, my question was, is it really true? So I went to a play, And in the middle of the play, they had, all of a sudden the intermission was much longer. So they're like saying, oh, sorry, we have to wait. Turned out the lead actor got sick. I guess they had some bad food before the play. They couldn't continue, so they had to call the understudy from home and put him in the play. So of course, he looked very different. And I'm telling you, he acted, I totally believe my paper now. It was really different. You know, it was the same lines, the same play, but very different. So I think that was kind of a neat experiment. So let me talk briefly about the paper with Filippo. So here what we do is basically, this is working paper, so it was presented at NBR, lots of universities. I had a tough presentation last week at the University of Washington, University of Washington, in Seattle, and we're still working on it as we speak. And it's presented here too. I forgot, we're going to present it on Friday. So the question is this. When you do technology change, everybody's talking about it's people. So if Northwestern University or Yeshiva University wants to switch to a new computer system, somebody has to make the decision. And we claim that it should be true that whoever makes the decision matters. Again, going back, talking about value of human capital. So if I make the decision, it might be different than if Ivo makes the decision. And I think, it's kind of an obvious statement, but the question is how can we test it? So in general, it's very hard to test because you don't really know, in a lot of cases, who made the actual decision to change, to implement a technological change on a large scale. We have some papers on, factories in different places, but at a large scale, it's hard to say. But in movies, you can do it. So what we're looking at is basically the period where digital filmmaking came into play. What you see here in this graph is the percentage of films made on film and digital during this period of 95 to 2018. And digital is the red and film is the black. And you can see that at the beginning of the period, there's virtually no digital. And at the end of the period, there's virtually no film. So it's a very well-defined period. And we have collected data on directors. And we see who made the decision, who switched, who is responsible for this big switch. There are a lot of details here in terms of the technology and how these things happen. And one thing I would tell you, if you work in an industry, and specifically I'm talking about the film industry, but any industry you work on, you really should talk to people and you should know that you know what you're talking about. Because things, I could go back to the previous paper. I thought I knew a lot about theater, but I learned a lot more while talking to the head of the Broadway Producers Association, talking to actors, talking to directors. So you have to learn what's going on in the industry so you don't do different things. We actually send a survey here to talk to directors as well as running the data. So as I said, it's a working paper. We have a lot of results, but let me just say one thing, and that is, I'll just show you one graph here. And what we see here is the digital films, the share of digital film by the experience of the director. And we see that most of this digital transformation was driven by first-time directors. And it's not that simple because you should know that directors' careers is very tricky. Most people make one film and they fail. So they took a really risky decision to make the first film digital. We have models, we have some thoughts about it, and I could talk a lot more about it. But I'm just saying the nice thing about it, we have all the information about the directors. We have their careers as they make the films. We also have what they did before. We have all the information about the movies, how successful they were. And so we can really see who drives the technology change and how it is related to their position in the career. So that's all I'm going to say about my various papers. And let me move on to a little bit of advice. And a lot of things have been said here that you'll see. This is my slide, and a lot of things have already been said. But let me say. So I added a few things. So let me just say a couple of things. So I think people have already mentioned it, but work with advisors and mentors. You're going into the profession. You think you have good ideas. In the first stage of your career, not only focus, as everybody has said, before you have tenure, but try to work with really good people who will be your mentors. And then it doesn't really matter, depending on what your objective function is. If you're getting really excited about things, you might want to work on various things that come into your mind. If you want to be successful, if somebody has been very successful and has published a lot of papers, they must know something, so you may want to work with them and learn from them as you go along. Now, don't cut corners, but don't let the good be the enemy, the perfect be the enemy of the good. I have co-authors who just wouldn't let the paper go. Keep going and going. That's not good. On the other hand, I have co-authors who's like, all right, we read it, I'm not sure it's true, but let's go on. That's not good either. So there's always a balance. And most of the advice we can give you, the truth is there's a balance. So nothing is completely true and nothing is completely wrong. Now, the other thing I would tell you also regarding that, one never knows. And I can tell you from talking to people about Nobel Prizes too, so it's my experience. Some of them really didn't know this was their Nobel work. Most of them, I would say, didn't know it was their Nobel work. They did it, they thought it was interesting, and then people got very excited about it. And in my personal experience, I can tell you that I have papers, I'm just writing it here to remember which ones, but there are some papers which I thought and my co-authors thought would really change the profession, and they really didn't. And then I can tell you about one other paper, since we're in financial management meeting. So we had a paper in financial management many years ago, and initially it was a trade credit paper. Essentially it did pretty well, people knew about it and cited it, and then nothing happened for like 10, 15 years. And then all of a sudden, like the last 5-7 years, it's picked up steam and citations, who knows? So you never know, you do your work, and you do things that you think are interesting, you do it competently, and you hope for the best. And like everybody said here too, the next piece of advice, like everybody said, it's a frustrating business, endless waits. It's, when I was talking to my actor friends, he said, you have a 10-year job, and I always have to go to auditions, I get rejections, I get so upset. I said, hey, what are you talking about? I get rejections every day. So, it's you get rejections from conferences, you get rejections from journals. And as I said, you have to take it with a grain of, other people said, you have to take it with a grain of salt. In other words, on one hand, I don't think Eva meant it, as everybody said that referees are not idiots necessarily, but they might be totally wrong. On the other hand, just read everything. So let's say you get a bad rejection, you get very upset. So just sit down, read this again, and see if there's and try as objectively as you can to see if there's anything in it that requires your attention. Maybe they know something. Maybe they noticed something you didn't. So whatever is necessary, correct, but don't, take it as the profession doesn't want me. So I had a PhD student years ago, and this PhD was in a good place. It wasn't, I won't say where it was. And this PhD student had 2 papers in their dissertation. And they sent it to RFS and JF, both got rejected, and this person essentially decided the profession doesn't want them. So, I don't know, if I did that, I wouldn't be here today, and I don't think you should do that. And let me, since everybody said all these things, let me add one or two things that I did write on the slide, because this is my last slide, so I'm almost done. So one thing to remember, two things that I would add. So one thing is, remember your co-authors are going to be with you longer than the average marriage. So choose them wisely. Papers take a long time. And sometimes you don't know. You start working with someone and then you learn that you can't work with them, they procrastinate, they don't do their stuff. So sometimes you can't help it, but just keep it in mind as you go along that this is what's going to happen. It's not somebody you talk to for an hour and then you work for a month or two and you're done. Average paper takes a long time. I have papers that were published that took 13 years to get published. A long time, 13 years. I have papers took much less, but in general you have to assume that, and I think that's important to remember. The other thing I would say, and people said that already, but let me just focus a little on this. When you work on a paper, you should really be able to do an elevator pitch to an intelligent person, not necessarily in the profession, and explain why it is interesting and exciting. I did a similar thing in Europe, and I put doctoral students on the spot. I wouldn't do it here, but I think it's a useful exercise. Say, all right, tell me in 3 minutes, what is your paper about? And I was talking to Marcin Kasperczyk, I don't know if you know who he is. He's in London, he was editor of the RFS. We had the same view. He was saying he was talking to his wife, who was very intelligent, but not in the field. If she doesn't find it interesting after he explains it, you have to rethink. And I adopt the same strategy. You talk to someone, let's say a wife or husband or friend or sister who are not in the field, very intelligent people, but not in the field. If you can't explain to them why this paper is interesting, you really have to rethink what you're doing. Maybe either you don't explain it well, or maybe it's really not interesting. So I think this is a kind of a good litmus test to do. I think I'll stop here. I'll just say one last thing. As I said initially, I'm very scattered. I don't think it is, as I said, my most cited paper is in the journal Marketing. So I don't know if it's helped, but I was talking to Coast John, some of you know, who's NYU, have been a co-author, talk about co-authors. We've been co-authors for close to 3 decades, working on different things. And I love them. We're doing great work, but we all both are very kind of following our interests. If you want to be really, really successful in the profession, that's the only thing you want to do, you should really focus. You're the world's greatest expert on LBOs in the banking industry. And then that will get you far. But your life will not be very interesting. Coase and I think, at least I can speak for him. Your life will not be interesting. This is why are you in academia? You want to follow all kinds of interesting ideas. So you should have a research agenda, a direction, but you could be broad. However, be very careful doing this before tenure. So I guess I'll stop here.